March 17, 1945, 5:47 in the morning. Iwo Jima, Staff Sergeant Robert Dutch Henderson, 23 years old, pressed his back against volcanic rock stained yellow with sulfur. His M1 Garand slick with sweat despite the morning cold. 300 yards ahead, through smoke drifting across black sand, he could see them. Concrete pillboxes the Navy said they destroyed. Bunkers that aerial reconnaissance swore didn't exist anymore. The 5th Marine Division had been assured this sector was clear. The Japanese machine gun fire said otherwise. Henderson glanced at the young Marine beside him, PFC James Morrison, barely 19, cradling something Henderson had never seen before. It looked like a standard M1A1 bazooka, but the rocket in Morrison's trembling hands was different. Instead of the familiar olive-drab warhead, this one had yellow and white markings, stenciled warnings Henderson couldn't quite read in the dim light. Morrison had received it just hours earlier with instructions that made no sense. Point, shoot, and don't look directly at the impact. The bunker ahead erupted again, its machine gun tearing through 2 Marines who tried to advance. Henderson knew what was about to happen. They'd try conventional bazookas first. They always did. The shaped charges would punch into the concrete, detonate, and accomplish exactly nothing against reinforced Japanese fortifications. Then more Marines would die trying to get close enough with satchel charges or flamethrowers. Unless Morrison's strange rocket worked the way the weapons sergeant had promised. White flame, the sergeant had said. The Japs are calling it white flame. By March 1945, the Pacific War had become a nightmare that American commanders couldn't solve with conventional weapons. Every Japanese-held island brought the same brutal reality: elaborate underground fortifications, interconnected tunnel systems, defensive positions designed by engineers who understood they were building tombs, not bunkers. The Japanese weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to extract maximum American casualties, hoping to make the cost of invasion so terrible that the United States would negotiate peace rather than assault the home islands. Iwo Jima represented this strategy's most sophisticated implementation. The island's commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had spent 8 months transforming 8 square miles of volcanic rock into a labyrinth of death. His engineers constructed 11 miles of tunnels connecting 1,500 rooms, chambers, and fighting positions. They built pillboxes with walls 5 feet thick, reinforced with steel rails from Manila mining operations. They positioned guns in caves with multiple firing ports, allowing defenders to shoot, retreat into tunnels, and emerge elsewhere when counterattacked. Traditional American weapons failed against this defensive network. The M1A1 bazooka, introduced in 1942, had proven effective against German tanks and fortifications in Europe. Its 2.36-inch rocket could penetrate 4 inches of armor plate at 300 yards. But penetration meant nothing against positions built from reinforced concrete and volcanic rock. The shaped charge would punch through the outer wall, explode inside a 5-foot-thick fortification, and accomplish nothing except alerting the defenders. Artillery bombardment had consumed 22,000 rounds during pre-invasion preparation, the most intense shore bombardment in Pacific War history. Navy spotters reported direct hits on bunkers, watched concrete structures collapse under 16-inch naval shells, confirmed positions destroyed. Then the Marines landed and discovered the bunkers were fine. The Japanese had built false structures to absorb bombardment, while the real fortifications remained hidden underground, emerging through camouflage firing ports only when American troops came within killing range. Flamethrowers worked, but flamethrower operators died. The effective range of the M2 flamethrower was 30 yards. To use it, Marines had to cross open ground under direct machine gun and mortar fire, carrying 70 pounds of jellied gasoline on their backs. On Iwo Jima's first day, February 19, 1945, the 5th Marine Division lost 8 flamethrower operators in the first hour alone. Each one killed represented months of specialized training that couldn't be quickly replaced. The casualty mathematics were unsustainable. Intelligence estimated 21,000 Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima. American planners projected 15,000 U.S. casualties to secure the island, a projection already considered horrific. By March 17th, after 26 days of fighting, American casualties had reached 19,217, including 4,189 killed. The Japanese had perfected reverse slope defense, interlocking fields of fire, and bunker placement that turned every American advance into a killing ground. Marine commanders needed a weapon that combined the bazooka's range with the flamethrower's effectiveness. Something that could reach bunkers from cover. Something that didn't require a Marine to expose himself for 30 seconds while pouring fire into a gun port. They needed to kill defenders inside positions that shaped charges couldn't damage and conventional explosives couldn't collapse. The Chemical Warfare Service had been working on the answer since 1943, but it had taken 2 years of combat experience to understand the question. The M10 white phosphorus rocket transformed a tank-hunting weapon into something that terrified entrenched defenders more than any conventional explosive. Officially designated the M10 WP round, unofficially called everything from Willie Peter to the Devil's Sparkler. The rocket weighed 3.4 pounds, slightly lighter than the standard high-explosive anti-tank round. Its warhead contained 1.3 pounds of white phosphorus suspended in a bursting charge designed not to penetrate armor, but to scatter burning particles across maximum area. The designers had removed the shaped charge cone entirely, replacing it with a thin metal casing scored to fragment into hundreds of pieces upon detonation. White phosphorus ignites spontaneously when exposed to oxygen, burning at temperatures exceeding 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Unlike thermite, which requires sustained contact, white phosphorus particles embed themselves in whatever they strike: flesh, wood, fabric, equipment, and continue burning until either the oxygen supply is exhausted or the phosphorus is completely consumed. Water doesn't extinguish white phosphorus fires. Immersing a burning particle in water temporarily suppresses the reaction, but the phosphorus reignites the moment it returns to air. The M10's bursting charge was calibrated to scatter phosphorus particles across a 40-foot radius. Upon impact, the rocket's base detonating fuse triggered a small explosive that ruptured the warhead casing, releasing the phosphorus while simultaneously fragmenting the metal shell. The burning particles, each piece ranging from dust-sized specks to fragments the size of a dime, would spray into bunker firing ports, ventilation shafts, and tunnel entrances. Inside enclosed spaces, the particles consumed available oxygen while producing dense white smoke. Hence the white flame nickname Japanese defenders gave it. Development challenges focused on stability. White phosphorus reacts violently with moisture, and Pacific combat environments were perpetually humid. The solution involved hermetically sealing the phosphorus in a waterproof container within the warhead, then surrounding it with a buffer layer that prevented premature ignition from the rocket motor's heat. Each M10 round required careful storage in sealed tubes with desiccant packets. Gunners received strict warnings: never fire a rocket that showed any sign of corrosion or damage to the waterproof seal. The first production M10 rounds arrived in the Pacific Theater in January 1945, distributed to select Marine units with minimal explanation. The rockets came with typewritten instruction sheets warning operators about backblast safety, proper storage, and one emphatic note: do not attempt to recover or handle unexploded rounds. Mark position and notify EOD personnel immediately. The warning existed because phosphorus particles could scatter even from impact fuse rounds that failed to detonate, creating invisible hazard zones that would ignite anyone who disturbed the contaminated soil. Marines who first saw the M10 rounds recognized they weren't standard ammunition immediately. The yellow and white hazard markings followed chemical warfare protocols, not conventional ordnance standards. Armorers who'd been loading bazookas for years approached the M10 with unusual caution. Rumors spread quickly. This was something new, something the brass thought might change the equation. Nobody really understood what white flame meant until they saw it work. Henderson watched Morrison fumble with the M10 round, trying to load it while keeping low behind the rock outcropping. The kid's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the rocket twice. Henderson reached over, steadied Morrison's grip, helped guide the round into the launcher tube until the contact spring engaged with an audible click. "You ever fire one of these?" Henderson asked, already knowing the answer. Morrison shook his head. "Sergeant Barnes just handed it to me this morning. Said point it at the bunker and squeeze the trigger. Said it worked different than regular rockets." The bunker ahead had gone quiet again. The machine gun crew waiting for more Marines to expose themselves. Henderson had seen this pattern for 3 weeks now. The Japanese would fire disciplined bursts, conserve ammunition. Wait, they had ammunition. They had water. They had fortifications that conventional weapons couldn't breach. They had time. Different how? Henderson pressed. Didn't say, just said I'd know when I saw it. 5:52 hours. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning mist, revealing the killing ground between their position and the bunker complex. 70 yards of open volcanic ash and rock. Henderson counted 4 Marine bodies from yesterday's assault, uncollected because any recovery attempt drew immediate fire from interlocking positions. The battalion had lost 23 men trying to advance this sector in 48 hours. The bunker complex had to be neutralized before the division could push north toward Hill 362A. Henderson signaled to Corporal Eddie Martinez, positioned 30 yards to their left with a Browning automatic rifle. 3 short bursts, the prearranged signal. Martinez acknowledged, then opened fire on the bunker's primary firing port. The sustained bar fire would force the Japanese gunners back from their position for maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds for Morrison to aim and fire. Now! Henderson shouted. Morrison rose to one knee, the bazooka balanced on his right shoulder, his left hand gripping the wooden forward stock. He aligned the optical sight with the bunker's dark firing port, visible as a rectangular shadow in the concrete face. His finger found the trigger lever. The rocket motor ignited with a familiar sharp crack. The backblast kicked up volcanic dust behind them. Henderson watched the rocket streak across the 70 yards, a small contrail marking its path. Standard procedure would have the rocket penetrate the firing port, explode inside, maybe kill 1 or 2 defenders if the geometry worked right. Usually didn't. This time was different. The warhead impacted just below the firing port at 5:52 and 23 seconds. The explosion seemed smaller than a regular HE round, almost disappointing. Then Henderson saw it. White fire, pure white. Fire erupted from the impact point, not like burning gasoline or magnesium flares, but something else entirely. Brilliant white particles sprayed across the bunker's face like a horizontal meteor shower. Each piece trailing white smoke. Dozens of particles shot through the firing port. Others ricocheted into ventilation slits Henderson hadn't even known existed. The white particles stuck to concrete, burned into the stone, kept burning. 5 seconds passed. The bunker's machine gun fell silent. 10 seconds. White smoke began pouring from every opening in the concrete structure. Not gray gun smoke, but thick white clouds that looked solid enough to walk on. 15 seconds. The screaming started. Henderson had heard men scream before, had heard wounded Marines calling for corpsmen, heard Japanese soldiers dying in pillboxes hit with satchel charges. This was different. These weren't screams of pain, but of pure animal panic. The sound of men confronting something their training hadn't prepared them for. 20 seconds after impact, the bunker's rear entrance, a position so well camouflaged Henderson hadn't spotted it in 3 days of observation, erupted with Japanese defenders. 3 men stumbled into the open, beating at their uniforms, clawing at burning fragments embedded in their skin and equipment. Their clothes were on fire, but not normal fire. White particles glowed against the dark fabric, each one producing its own column of white smoke. One defender dove face first into the volcanic ash, trying to smother the flames. The burning particles kept glowing through the ash. Martinez's bar cut down 2 defenders before they'd staggered 10 feet from the bunker. The third man, his face obscured by white smoke still rising from burning particles in his hair, ran blindly toward the American lines. He made it 15 yards before a Marine rifleman ended his panic with a single shot. The white smoke continued pouring from the bunker for another 2 minutes. Henderson could smell it now, a sharp, acrid odor that made his eyes water even at 70 yards. Chemical smoke, not just burning wood or fabric. The machine gun remained silent. No movement came from the firing ports. 5:55 hours. Henderson made the decision. Martinez, Freeman, on me. We're checking that bunker. The 3 Marines crossed the killing ground that had claimed 4 lives yesterday. Weapons ready. Expecting fire from secondary positions? Nothing. They reached the bunker's blast-scarred face, still radiating heat from the white phosphorus particles embedded in the concrete. Henderson peered through the firing port, careful not to touch the glowing fragments still burning around the opening's edge. The interior was hell-rendered in white and black. Phosphorus particles had scattered across every surface, burning wherever they'd landed. The machine gun lay abandoned, its barrel bent where someone had tried to drag it away from burning ammunition. Equipment smoldered. Fabric hung in charred strips. The bunker's concrete walls channeled white smoke toward the rear exit, but enough particles had fallen to the floor that the defenders would have been wading through burning material with every step. 2 bodies lay in the bunker's main chamber, overcome by smoke before they could escape. Their uniforms showed dozens of small burn marks where phosphorus particles had embedded and continued burning even after the men died. The white particles were still glowing, still producing smoke, still burning 90 seconds after impact. Henderson had cleared bunkers with satchel charges, with grenades, with point-blank rifle fire. He'd never seen defenders abandon a position this quickly, never seen panic override the fanatical defense doctrine that had defined Japanese tactics for 3 years. The white phosphorus hadn't just killed the defenders or destroyed their position. It had broken their will to fight, driven them into the open where conventional weapons could engage them. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered, staring at the still-burning particles scattered across the bunker floor. "What the hell is that stuff?" Henderson didn't answer. He was already scanning for the next bunker, the next pillbox, the next impossible defensive position. Morrison still had 5 M10 rounds in his ammunition bag. They had work to do. By March 19th, 1945, 2 days after Henderson's demonstration, every Marine bazooka team on Iwo Jima had received white phosphorus rockets. Supply clerks distributed 2,400 rounds in 48 hours, prioritizing units engaged in bunker reduction operations across the northern sectors. The immediate tactical impact was measurable in casualty rates. Marine divisions equipped with M10 rounds reported 34% fewer casualties during bunker assault operations compared to the previous week. The Japanese response revealed genuine fear. Intelligence officers interrogating prisoners captured in late March reported consistent descriptions of the white flame weapon that burned through stone, couldn't be extinguished, and filled positions with choking smoke. One prisoner, a sergeant who'd survived an M10 attack on a cave position near Hill 362C, described watching white particles burn through a wooden support beam in 40 seconds, causing a partial tunnel collapse that buried 3 defenders. The psychological impact exceeded the physical damage. Defenders who'd held positions under sustained artillery bombardment evacuated after single white phosphorus strikes. Production limitations prevented unlimited employment. The Chemical Warfare Service facility at Pine Bluff Arsenal, Arkansas, could manufacture approximately 15,000 M10 rounds per month. This production rate meant field commanders had to carefully allocate the ammunition to priority targets rather than employing it as standard ordnance. Distribution prioritized Marine Corps units preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan's home islands. By June 1945, Marine divisions staged in the Philippines for the Kyushu invasion had received sufficient M10 stocks to equip 1/3 of their bazooka teams with mixed loadouts, 2 white phosphorus rounds and 4 conventional HE rounds per operator. The tactical doctrine emphasized using M10 rounds as the initial strike against fortified positions, followed by conventional assault if the phosphorus attack failed to dislodge defenders. Operational reports from Okinawa, where fighting continued through June 1945, documented the M10's effectiveness against cave positions that honeycombed the island's southern limestone ridges. On May 14, 1945, Company K, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines engaged a cave complex near Shuri Castle that had resisted demolition charges, napalm strikes, and flamethrower assault for 6 days. 3 M10 rounds fired into the cave's main entrance killed or drove out 42 defenders within 8 minutes, compared to previous assaults that had cost 9 Marine casualties without breaching the position. The weapon's limitations became apparent through sustained combat use. White phosphorus particles would occasionally ignite propellant charges in the bazooka tube if moisture contamination allowed premature ignition. Between March and June 1945, 11 Marine bazooka operators suffered burns from misfires, leading to revised handling procedures requiring visual inspection of each round's waterproof seal before loading. The rockets proved sensitive to rough handling during amphibious operations. Units landing on Okinawa reported 8% of their M10 stocks arrived with damaged seals, rendering the rounds too hazardous to fire. Enemy countermeasures evolved slowly. By May 1945, Japanese defenders on Okinawa had begun storing water in fortified positions, specifically to combat white phosphorus particles, based on the mistaken belief that water extinguished the burning material. This actually worsened casualties. Defenders would immerse burning particles in water buckets, temporarily suppressing the reaction, then suffer renewed burns when the phosphorus reignited upon exposure to air. The tactic's failure further enhanced the M10's psychological impact. Defenders concluded the weapon was unstoppable through conventional countermeasures. Strategic planners preparing for Operation Olympic, the November 1945 invasion of Kyushu, requested 500,000 M10 rounds, enough to equip every Marine and Army bazooka team in the invasion force. Chemical Warfare Service engineers calculated they could meet this requirement by expanding Pine Bluff production, with full production reaching 75,000 rounds monthly by September 1945. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th made these production plans irrelevant. Japan's surrender on August 15th terminated Operation Downfall and eliminated the need for mass production of specialized anti-fortification ammunition. Pine Bluff Arsenal had manufactured approximately 180,000 M10 rounds by war's end. Roughly 35,000 had been expended in combat operations on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The M10 white phosphorus bazooka round disappeared from American arsenals almost as quickly as it appeared in combat. Production ceased on August 17, 1945, 2 days after Japan's surrender announcement. The Chemical Warfare Service directed Pine Bluff Arsenal to halt all white phosphorus munitions manufacturing and transition production lines back to conventional ordnance by September. The military classified the M10's development history, combat employment records, and technical specifications under secret clearance in November 1945. This classification stemmed not from the weapon's technology — white phosphorus had been used in artillery shells since World War I — but from sensitivity about chemical warfare perception in the post-war international environment. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 prohibited chemical weapons use, and while white phosphorus technically qualified as incendiary rather than chemical, military legal advisors worried about perception issues during the war crimes, trials proceeding in Tokyo and Nuremberg. Existing stocks faced disposal challenges. The military had accumulated approximately 145,000 unfired M10 rounds by war's end, stored at depots across the Pacific and arsenals in the continental United States. White phosphorus ammunition requires specialized destruction procedures. Simple burning or conventional demolition can scatter toxic phosphorus particles across wide areas. The Chemical Warfare Service spent 18 months carefully incinerating the stocks in controlled conditions, completing disposal operations in March 1947. The Korean War briefly revived interest in white phosphorus bazooka ammunition, when North Korean forces established fortified positions along the 38th parallel in 1951. Marine Corps ordnance officers requested access to M10 technical documentation for potential renewed production. The request was denied. The military had transitioned to the 3.5-inch M20 Super Bazooka by 1950, and the M10 design was incompatible with the larger diameter tube. Engineers did develop a 3.5-inch white phosphorus round, designated the M30, but production remained limited, and the weapon saw minimal combat employment. Staff Sergeant Robert Henderson survived Iwo Jima. He participated in the final Northern Sector operations, employing M10 rounds against cave positions until the island was declared secure on March 26, 1945. His combat record credited him with directing the destruction of 17 fortified positions using white phosphorus ammunition, contributing to his Silver Star citation for leadership under fire during the campaign. Henderson never discussed the M10 rounds publicly. He returned to civilian life in Oregon, worked as a machinist, attended veteran reunions where he would speak about fellow Marines, but rarely about specific weapons or tactics. When researchers from the Naval Historical Center interviewed him in 1987 for an oral history project, Henderson described the white phosphorus rockets as effective and necessary, then changed the subject to the men who hadn't made it home. PFC James Morrison, the young Marine who fired that first M10 round on March 17th, received orders transferring him to a replacement battalion preparing for Operation Olympic 3 days after Henderson's assault. He spent the summer of 1945 training in the Philippines, carrying M10 rounds during practice assaults against mock Japanese fortifications, preparing for an invasion that never came. Morrison returned home to Illinois in December 1945, completed college on the GI Bill, became a high school chemistry teacher, a career choice he attributed to his wartime experience with the white fire that burned in water. The classification of M10 combat records meant that neither Henderson nor Morrison could discuss their experiences in detail for decades. The Official Secrets Act they'd signed upon receiving the specialized ammunition remained in effect until 1991, when most records from World War II chemical weapons programs were declassified. By the time they could speak freely, the technology had evolved beyond recognition. The veterans who employed the M10 understood they'd participated in developing a weapon that changed tactical doctrine, even if classification prevented them from sharing those experiences with the public. The Japanese defenders who faced the white flame and survived carried different memories. In post-war interviews conducted by Allied interrogation teams, former soldiers described the M10 attacks as among the most terrifying weapons they'd encountered. Worse than flamethrowers because the burning couldn't be escaped. Worse than artillery because the particles seemed to hunt for gaps in cover. Worse than bombs because the smoke made defensive positions uninhabitable within seconds. One veteran, a former Imperial Army corporal who defended positions on both Iwo Jima and Okinawa, told researchers in 1952, "We expected to die. Accepting death made conventional weapons bearable. But the white flame made us want to live long enough to escape it. That desire to run, to breathe, to stop burning, it broke something in men who'd prepared for honorable death. We became animals fleeing fire instead of soldiers defending positions." The men who created, deployed, and employed the M10 white phosphorus bazooka round developed a weapon that killed through chemistry, terror, and the simple biological imperative to breathe. They didn't celebrate this achievement. They recognized it as necessary within the brutal context of Pacific fortification warfare, employed it to save American lives, and then, with remarkable consistency, chose not to speak about it for 50 years. Their silence speaks to the weapon's effectiveness and the moral weight of using chemistry as a battlefield tool, even in the service of ending a war that had already consumed millions of lives. The Marines who stormed Iwo Jima faced an enemy who had months to prepare defenses in orders to never surrender. The M10 white phosphorus round gave those Marines a fighting chance against positions designed to be their graves. It saved American lives by making Japanese positions untenable, not through destruction, but through creating conditions where defending meant dying and evacuating meant dying faster. They called it white flame. The Marines called it survival.